A tax on porn? That's what lawmakers in Pennsylvania are proposing. They say it's going to ensure that internet porn makers pay their fair share. But my guest today thinks that's not the real story. And what does this have to do with gooning? Do you even know what gooning is? Well, we're going to tell you there's a big new story on porn's super users. We're going to talk a little bit about that too. Welcome to a special bonus episode of the Reason Roundtable. This is your libertarian review of news and culture. This is not a full-sized roundtable. It is just a table for two. I'm Peter Suderman, and today I am joined by Reason's very own Elizabeth Nolan Brown. Liz, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So in Pennsylvania, they want to tax porn, and they're calling it a titty tax. Is that right? How's this going to work?
I don't think that the lawmakers are calling it that.
Well, you called it that.
We were calling it that, which I cribbed from Mike Stimule of the Free Speech Coalition. So yes, no,
Okay.
that is not the official name.
How does this tax work? What would it do? What's it supposed to do? And what would the actual effect be?
So the lawmakers have proposed it, and right now it's just a memo saying that they're going to put this legislation forth in a minute. But they would, in addition to the normal 6% sales tax, it would be an additional 10% tax levied on porn consumption. So anybody who buys an individual video or subscription to a platform or anything like that would pay an extra 10% tax on the porn, in addition to the regular sales tax.
And do porn companies or producers, people who are being paid by this, doing business, do they have to declare themselves to be pornographers? Do they have to register or something? I mean, how is that even determined? There's stuff that some people would say is pornography, and other people would say, oh, that's just, it might even be a little erotic, but that's not even pornography. Is there going to be a commission? Is this a sort of how is this decided?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question, and that's not one that they have worked out so far. And I feel like probably not exactly one that they will work out. This is the problem with so much of this legislation. Like Ohio recently passed a law, an age verification law, saying you have to show ID if you're if you're a porn platform, you have to card people or use biometric information or something. And then they defined the adult platforms though in such a way as to exclude almost all adult platforms. So that was kind of fun.
Right. So there's just a kind of fundamental uncertainty about what types of what would count as porn, what would be categorized that way here. But part of this is the other part of this that struck me as strange is I mentioned this up top is they say this is just about raising revenue, about making sure that porn makers pay their fair share. So they're pitching this as a budgetary measure?
Yeah, which is what's kind of amazing at first, because yes, they literally described it as making sure they pay their fair share, which is that's like the definition of not paying your fair share. If you have to pay this extra tax above and beyond what the vast majority of people have to pay just because of the kind of a product or content.
And it would apply obviously to producers who are working out of state, right?
Yes, yeah.
Right, so it's not just in state.
It's not exactly clear if consumers would have to pay it, right? At the point of, buying a video or a subscription or whatever, or if it would have to be paid by the platforms. But I feel like that's not exactly it's kind of a distinction without difference, because either way, it's going to get passed on to all people involved in this.
Do you believe their argument that this is just about raising revenue, making sure these folks pay their fair share, whatever that is? Or because so often we see, we see these taxes, we see these restrictions put on, adult content, and it's very clearly being done by people who oppose the existence of the industry, can't ban internet porn. They know that those measures to just flat out ban internet porn have typically been struck down by the court. So what they're trying to do is just push back, sort of crack down on it through the tax code.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the very first pieces that I have written in life was about a poll tax on strip clubs, and you edited it for
Doublethink magazine.
Yeah,
yes, this was 20 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. So this is an old idea that people used to be doing a lot with strip clubs, and now we've moved it down to online content. But yeah, the idea of applying a special sort of sin taxes to anything related to sexually oriented businesses is a very old one. They don't specifically say so far that this is about anything else like that, but which is odd, because yeah, they usually just come out and say that. But yes, I suspect it obviously has to do with more than just like, oh, we need to like increase our budget a little bit. But the funny thing is that, when you hear usually about people's complaints about porn, usually today they don't just do the moral complaints. Usually it's couched in the language of like, we're worried about exploitation. We're worried about, stopping underage porn. We're worried about stopping, performers from being exploited and stuff like that. And those are obviously legitimate concerns. But like this sort of thing, like the tax on the legitimate platforms, like would make those problems worse, right? Because like what you
How
want,
would it make it worse? Explain that to me.
because what you want is people to be, if they are going to be watching porn online, you want them to be, purchasing it from legitimate sites that are porn production companies that have checked performers' IDs and checked that they're above age and checked that they have consent, or these, platforms like OnlyFans where performers are selling directly to creators, and the platform itself has steps to verify that they're above age and that they're not being forced into this and stuff like that. Like that's the kind of stuff you're gonna get if you're paying for it. If you're going to disincentivize paying for it because you add these extra taxes and make it more expensive, you're going to send people, to sites where they don't have to pay, and because they're not being taxed, and that's sort of, increases the chance of abuse and exploitation being present.
I mean, and this is something that people don't think about all that much, but does happen, as we know, with cigarettes, for example, where states that have very high cigarette taxes end up having pretty robust black markets in cigarettes being brought in from other states, which with much lower taxes. And so if you tax something, even if you think it's, partly you say it's to raise revenue or you say it's to change behavior, if you tax something, you might get less of it. But what you are also going to do is drive some segment of the market for that product into the black market, which is inherently more dangerous, less regulated, less likely to be sort of transparent, open, safe, all of this, right, for both the consumers and the performers themselves. And so if you are concerned about the safety aspect of this, this is absolutely the wrong way to go. But the other thing that you mentioned in your piece that when you wrote about this is it's a little bit of an odd way to go after porn companies, given, look, we're on the internet right now. There's a lot of porn on the internet, and most of it is free. There's no revenue being transacted between the person watching and the producer. So how does that play into this?
Well, right. I mean, exactly. So that's the other big thing you hear about, the reasons for people opposing, trying to regulate porn is that we need people to watch less of it. But like in this case, the tax is not going to help. Like all you're going to do with the tax is disincentivize, like you said, send people to a black market, disincentivize paying performers for their things. You're not going to stop people. People are just like, there's so much free porn available on the internet. It's like, yeah, it's as if like you were trying to put a tax on cigarettes, but also cigarettes were just like floating in the air outside, only slightly more dangerous cigarettes, like it's just, yeah, it's such a,
It doesn't make sense. It is, as with all of these kind of crackdowns and restrictions, just part of what I, sort of see as a sort of moral crusade. And sometimes it's explicitly presented that way. But in many other cases, it's presented as, oh, we're going to do this for tax, regulatory, budget reasons. And we see this actually, I think, in this big story. See a version of this kind of moralizing about porn consumption in this big Harper's story by Daniel Kolitz, which is called The Goon Squad. And it is about, as I said, porn super users, people who have kind of devoted themselves to watching porn in a way this seems kind of endless, or at least, I mean, it's hours and hours per day, in what are called goon caves in some cases with, multiple screens set up watching PMVs, which is short for porn music videos, these kind of clip reels in which, porn clips have been spliced together so that you just sort of, there's nothing, it's only the stuff that these people want to see kind of all the time, and they're just sort of going very deep into this. And this is a story that casts judgment on that lifestyle, but also tries to actually explore that lifestyle and the people who are involved in it, and tries to understand them. What did you make of this?
Yeah, I thought that aspect was interesting. I mean, when I first was reading it, I was like, the first word that came to my mind was that this was non-judgmental. And I was like, no, that's not right. Like, it's definitely judgmental, but it's not moralizing about it. It's not judgmental in the ways you normally see with this sort of thing, I thought.
So I think I agree with you that it's not judgmental in the normal way. And what's interesting is that it's judgmental in a way that implicates people who are not gooners, who are
Right.
not
Yeah.
part of this lifestyle. Because at the very end, in one of the concluding paragraphs, I don't have it in front of me, but I'm basically gonna summarize it. Says something like, yes, these people are losing hours and hours a day in many cases to kind of watching what amounts to endless short form video, and they are there's a physical sexual stimulation aspect to this for sure, but
And
aren't
parasocial relationships.
right, and all of that, yes. But aren't millions of other people also losing hours and hours a day, kind of giving their minds over to short form video and to kind of this sort of call it, everybody calls it brain rot now. I don't know if you like that term, but like giving themselves and their time over to this. And this is, I actually thought was, I'm always kind of, oh, sure, it's another piece about how internet pornography is bad.
Yeah.
Or it's another piece sort of like, we got to ban internet porn. You hear this all the time now. But I thought this piece was much more interesting because in some ways, what it focused on was, it's not the porn, it's the time. It's the amount of your life. And this is the thing where maybe I'll be a little bit of judgmental, is I don't exactly want to tell people what to do, but at the same time, do you want to spend your life just like, whether it's TikTok or whether it's Pornhub? Is that how you want to spend your life? Maybe not.
Right. I mean, that's what I meant. That's why I said, like, at first the word that came to mind was non-judgmental, but it's definitely not non-judgmental. But it is judgmental in a way that is different than most of these things we see about porn or anything related to sex. Like, it doesn't use the sex is magic framework, as Maggie McNeil might put it. This sort of thing where, like, when we're talking about sex, everything is like extra special and different. Like, I really liked that it sort of, it was very specific about this subculture, community, whatever you want to call it. But it also, yeah, made it a part of like a larger sort of a critique on the way people spend their time, and also this sort of, they're not that different. I mean, they are different in many ways, but like also like fundamentally these aren't monsters or people that are just like, yeah, I really liked the element that you brought up.
The one other thing I just wanted to say here is a big part of what the story explains or sort of helps us see is that this is about creating an altered mental and physical state. And okay,
Yes.
maybe you disagree with that, but this is something that people do all the time with their lives. I mean, in some cases, they do it with drugs, right? And we, in fact, have friends, colleagues, people who are quite successful professionals who use drugs, who use mind-expanding drugs, who smoke pot, whatever it is. And sometimes that is part of even, sort of a regular part of their life. And they're trying to get to a place that is a little bit more physically pleasurable, kind of trying to change their body chemistry in a way that they find enjoyable. And it doesn't make them moral monsters because they are trying to do this. And so I sort of see these things as being kind of on the same spectrum. And that doesn't mean that you can't abuse drugs. And it doesn't mean that no one has a problem with these things. It doesn't mean that none of these, gooners who we meet in this story have issues that maybe they need to resolve. But there is a way in which we need to kind of, as a society, pull back on some of the judgment and maybe look at a little bit at some of our own habits with TikTok, with endless scrolling, with whatever it is, and think about this in a somewhat different way. And this story helped us to do that. Though I just want to ask you a final question here because we gotta go.
Can I say one more thing
Yeah.
about it? I thought I really like too that they pointed out that, like, for a lot of people this is going to be like a temporary stage. Like, this is not
Yeah.
all encompassing. Like, most of the people we talked to were in their 20s or teens. Like, this is not like a thing where these people are necessarily beyond hope, and this is going to be a lifelong way that they live. But there was this kind of, and I thought that it for the most part did a really good job of that. But there was this really weird part at the beginning where it said, like, like in another time, these people, at least some of these people might have been like suburban dads thinking about like their taxes on their subway to their jobs and blah, blah, blah. And I did find that a little jarring because I'm like, why? Why do we think that? I mean, like, there have always been people who lived like weird lives of quiet desperation. There have always been people who are perverts. Like, there have always been these people. Like, I don't think we can just necessarily assume that, like, God, I've been trying to get through this without saying gooners, and I'm gonna have to say it now. I don't think we can necessarily assume that gooners are people who would have just been like healthy, well-adjusted suburban dads, men in the flannel suit in some earlier era per se.
Yeah, I think it's probably only a matter of time before Pennsylvania lawmakers propose a gooning tax. All right, folks, we got to go here. Thank you so much for watching and for listening. If you want us to answer one of your questions on air, please send your short, succinct, pithy, and otherwise not very long question to podcast@reason.com. That's podcast@reason.com. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you soon.